Welcome to the webinar by WebEngage. This is Divya Sharma Dikshit, the Digital Marketing Strategist at WebEngage. A few pointers before we start. You can report any issues you're facing on the chat, which is on your GoToWebinar panel. It will be a 30-minute session followed by the question-answer session. If you have any queries during the webinar, you can punch them in the GoToWebinar panel. We'll address them towards the end of the webinar. The slides used in this presentation are uploaded in the Handout section. So that sums up all the formalities that we have for the webinar. Coming back to the topic, that is customer retention, which is as important for your business as your acquisition. For this, we have Mr. Ankur Gattani with us, who headed CRM at Foodpanda and Jabong and has a vast experience of 7 years in mobile marketing and e-commerce. Welcome, Ankur. It's great to have you on board with us.
Thanks, Divya. Are we already sharing the slides with everyone?
Yeah.
Great. So, the first slide was basically the highlight in terms of just remembering that getting a profitable repeat order from every customer that you acquire is actually the only way to recoup your CSEs. I mean, the word is quoted often now that you cannot grow your way into profitability. Your gross margins have to be positive, which means you cannot go on giving crazy discounts to every person who wants to order with you. Yeah, so that being said, how do you really go about this? The job of a CRM team often gets limited to email and push, but if somebody is supposed to own the idea of customer lifetime value, which is the sum total of the amount of money each customer pays the company as a profit over his lifetime, this would entail getting new customers to become regulars, getting active customers to stay active, and getting inactive customers to become active again and continue shopping. So, in terms of the current action that's happening in the market, in the desperation and eagerness to grow really fast, you could see communications of the kind that you see on your screen coming to your phones or your emails fairly frequently. This is the same communication or same kind of offer that you'll see on companies' Facebook ads, on their Twitter, on their display, on their website itself, and the in-app messages also. So this obviously is sort of a very one size fits all kind of approach. Now, if you remember from the Marketing 101 lessons itself, the idea of segmentation, targeting, and positioning is something fairly fundamental to the idea of marketing. And yet, across the companies that we see, people aren't really doing even the basics right. Now, if you look at even the basic parameters of how customers actually engage with a company over a period, some of them would have given a fairly positive customer lifetime value in terms of actually not using discounts at all times. On the other side, you will have some people who would have continuously used discounts, and actually every time they order, they make a bigger loss to the company. And there is just about no way you can recover this loss back from this customer because he'll never place an order which is ever profitable. Now, if you're continuously pressing the same discounts to everyone or the same kind of offers to everyone, that's kind of unfair to the guy who's been a good customer in that sense. On the other side, you're actually feeding the deal hunter. Now, if you really want to do this more effectively, how do you really do it? That's where a lot of our subsequent conversation would focus on that, how do you really go about communicating effectively to different customers differently? This is also another way of saying how do you enable one-to-one communication? How do you enable segmentation across different channels of action? So that's really what we're talking about next. So if you look at the idea of segmentation from a CRM perspective, right now that often gets limited to the idea of emails or sometimes SMS and pushes. But all of us fairly well know that the way email channel works at the end of the whole thing, if you want to reactivate customers, about 1,000 of people receiving an email would actually get converted into an order. So if you really want to retain people, it doesn't really work enough to actually just use emails as a channel. So you need to implement segmentation, but not just on emails. Can you really amplify the segmentation? How do you actually make sure that most customers that are transacting with you actually get the offer that's actually segmented for them and targeted and relevant for their purpose, which is way the company would want to communicate. Now, if you look at the organizational structure of most of the teams in the e-commerce or the online marketing space, all of them are kind of structured across these different channels of marketing. So you will have somebody for SEO, somebody for SEM, display, offline, and so on. Now, often what ends up happening is each of these guys is optimizing for himself, which means he's trying to optimize the best click-through rate that he can get for his SEM ads vis-a-vis the best CPA he could possibly get for his display ads and so on. There is not as much joint effort in terms of all these guys actually coming together into a single customer flow. where you can actually get a journey of some sort enabled. Now, how do you get that to happen unless all these guys are actually collaborating, not just in amplifying the same exact message across the board, but actually setting up a proper segmentation plan across the channels? So that's where the first part, that everybody needs to communicate from a central same data source, is a critical one. Now, a Nirvana in this kind of setup would probably be that a customer, which is a high value customer for the company, he abandons the cart on his mobile app. A follow up happens on the push channel. The next follow up happens on the Facebook or display channel. Or the third day, you actually have an incentive level one for this guy, but that's actually sent over an email. On the day four, this is again a push with the same customer, the same message about the card, and there's a level two. Of course, across the board, we are trying to see that we're making sure that this guy is not actually converted and placed a complete order. So we see that at the level five of our operation, we show him the most aggressive offer that we can make for this guy. Now, these aggression of offers could be different for different kinds of people. The guy who was the most profitable can probably get an offer which might still make for a lossy order just to get him back. But the guy who's so far been placing consistently lossy orders shouldn't really get an offer which is going to make a further loss to us. He at best gets a discount which is less than your margins, or at best he'll place a zero profit order. That's, I think, how it would be ideal to structure. And if you really use different channels to enhance the same message in a more continuous across a timeline mechanism, the kind of impact you can see with these messages can be significantly higher than different channels trying to throw the same message across without really any relationship with the other channel. So that's part one. So this actually slide looked different in the other one that I prepared. So there's a heart at the center, and you actually have a central system where the data is getting segmented and prepared into sort of all the different components for different channels that is needed. And then this data is being pumped across, just like a heart pumps blood across to the body. You will have the same segmentation data being pumped across the Facebook, the SMS, or the email channel, the push channel, the in-apps or the websites, and the display retargeting channel. These are channels which are already available to do a central CRM data set on. Now, of course, you might imagine that there are still more channels which are offline, which are not yet possible to target, which is why my belief is that all the offline channels should primarily focus on new customer acquisition, and the customer should actually know that the best offer that he would get from the company is not on your coupon side, but actually on the My Account page of his website or his application. And that's where the importance of utilizing the subsequent channels apart from email becomes super important. So if you look at the email channel giving you only one out of 1,000 customers, predominantly all the customers are either visiting the website or the application. So if you want to reactivate somebody or to cross sell something to him, it's really important that you make sure he's being made the same offer on his application experience the moment he's coming there. Of course, WebEngage is a good partner to do something like this, but even if you don't do it via them, you have to find mechanisms on the website itself to see how you can communicate a CRM-led message to this guy. Otherwise, you're showing a reactivation message to somebody on his email. He's not come back in a month, and now when he comes to the website, he sees that the offer that he's got in the email is probably same or inferior to the offer that's available to the general public on the site homepage itself. So there's obviously a dissonance there, and it doesn't really lead to a good consumer experience. So that's where to have the central data at the heart of everything, and then making sure that the consistency of messaging across different channels is really taken care of very well becomes super crucial to the idea of journey management. So if you look at the amount of data that's available across most organizations, it's not necessarily always that there's somebody who's actually assigned the job of putting this together in a single sort of framework. Now, across different industries, you will have different levels of transaction data. In the e-commerce space, you have transaction data, plus you have all the browsing behavior. Now, you wouldn't imagine the amount of interaction or response rates you can get by using information from the user's last browsing session. If I've been checking out sneakers on Amazon, the company does make sure that next day it will send me an email with the same sneakers. The same kind of stuff can be enabled by a lot of companies which are in a transactional space. If I applied for a flight ticket on Clear Trip, I still don't see that company sending across a reminder of the same flight ticket in terms of the schedule and the source and the destination. Now, those are things which are relatively easier to implement in terms of data capture and then processing in terms of campaign setup. But the more you start getting comprehensive with this data collection itself, you could make sure that somebody who has complained about his last order on a support ticket is not again getting a discount email to place an order immediately. You might want to wait for a couple of days before you do that. And that's where making sure that whatever data you have available across the different parts of the company is actually being tracked at a user level. It's identified at a single user ID. Because if you don't have a user ID associated with the data, that's pretty much useless from a CRM perspective. Now, of course, there are things you can do with anonymous data, but I won't really get into that because I'm focusing right now on retention as a topic, and that's where anonymous data is fairly useless. And if you are able to pull all of this data together, the kind of capabilities that come in to do new kind of campaigns keeps growing with every additional kind of data that you have. At the same time, there are some basics that you need to make sure that are able to connect the different kinds of data together. So if you are on your website, there's a cookie ID which is there for you. If you're in the email address can be linked to the same cookie ID. Alongside on your mobile application, the device ID is there. So if you have a unique identifier for each user and all the other identifiers he has are connected to the same primary key, then it becomes much easier for you to do the same thread of communication or to at least know this guy across channels. So likewise, if you look at guest accounts as a concept that lets people create new IDs every single time they place an order, which makes it really difficult for you to string this data together into a single ID because then you have a multiple combinations of mobile numbers, email addresses, delivery addresses, and so on. And there is no way you can enable a simplified customer journey. So on the promotions bit. So when you actually relate all these tables, you would be able to set up a segment which is fairly complex in nature. Now, of course, you would want to identify which segment has the highest value in terms of trying to get them back or trying to get them to order. But a segment like people who ordered their first shirt coming from Facebook in the last 7 days, if they turn out to be a fairly profitable group and you want to offer them this bonanza offer that gets them to come back, and you want to do it across channels, then you have to be able to have all this relational data across the board. So this includes the product he's bought, this includes his date of purchase, this includes his source channel. Now you could also, subsequently include stuff like which channel or rather which sort of level of discount he used and so on. Now, on the other side, going beyond data, you'll have to think about how you create the communication that you're sending out to these customers. The moment you design a pretty email on a daily basis and continuously send it, that email becomes useless after one send. And there is very limited room to personalize a very pretty looking email. Across most companies, should be possible. I mean, if you look at travel as a sector, if you look at e-commerce product as a sector, if you look at food delivery as a sector, if you look at even the banking system as a sector, you would be able to find out a way of actually breaking the communication down into modules, which are possible to put against each other in a single sort of sequence. So then, accordingly, it has a whole bunch of reusable components, and depending on who the user is, his kind of modules will come in. So, for instance, if it's a user who has browsed shirts, if I have a module in my email which is more around the products that the user has browsed, now the different products will keep fitting into that particular slot in the email instead of everybody getting the same banner with the shirts. So likewise, you'll be able to apply something similar to all sort of communication. The travel company might want to do the same sort of source and destination combinations, and you implement that code to use those personalization variables in the email. Now, personalization, of course, can be a fairly more complex and different topic, but the idea is when you're looking to do this kind of journey automation on an everyday basis, you're sending a million odd emails, which are all different from each other. And if you have to do that, then you have to think modular on your design. You cannot go on designing one very nice looking email because that's again a one size fits all approach that you end up taking. So going further in terms of since we are talking about the foundation, it's important to identify the kind of tools that will help you actually execute the kind of campaigns that I've mentioned so far across the channels. So the central database system remains at the core of the whole thing. And that has to collect all the data from everywhere and actually make it ready in terms of segmentation to be used across channels. And then you can use the channels that I've mentioned over here, which are examples. Of course, you could identify your own partners to do these things. But in effect, your emails, your SMSs, your push notifications, your on-site experience, your display retargeting, all of these are now possible to connect with the same data system and actually try the same segmentation across the board. So that's where this is an important part. And of course, any of you could follow up subsequently with me or WebEngage so to develop further on this topic. But like I said, so this would actually make sure that on an everyday basis, you have a live audience which is getting the same campaign, but that audience itself is changing. So, for instance, if I put a Facebook custom audience saying that these are the people who just placed their first order in the last 7 days and are yet to place their second order, the audience in this campaign will keep changing on a daily basis, but the communication they see might actually be the same. So that's where, if you are able to set up your data properly enough and the flows to the different systems properly, this should be a fairly easy campaign to set up and scale further. So the other topic also comes in terms of what kind of people that you must have. Now, you could sometimes use borrowed resources from different teams, but depending on the scale of the company, it is very crucial to make sure you have these skill sets available and they're available in a fairly sort of full-time fashion in that sense. So if you look at the data guy, that jobs, I mean, it might not seem very obvious to somebody as to why do you need a data guy to do email marketing or sort of CRM, but to procure the data from all different sources and make sure it's automated to segment in a certain fashion, whether you want to use recency, frequency, monetary value, or a churn predictor kind of segment, you have to be able to segment the data centrally. And this guy would also make sure that the data is getting pumped to the different systems. Then the designer and the HTML guy who can think modules. The copywriter, of course, should be able to write copies which are more generic in nature and not just usable ones. These would be probably communication that, sometimes no copy is better than good copy, because what happens is, if you look at Amazon email subject lines, the subject line actually contains the name of the product that you last saw with it. So that was a choice done by the copywriter to not actually write any additional copy, but just to use the product name in the subject line. And likewise, you'll subsequently need a guy who knows the tools across the board. This could be sort of a little spread out across teams because, for instance, when we're implementing something similar at Foodpanda, we had the Facebook campaigns and display campaigns managed by the respective teams, except we used to supply them the segmentation from a CRM sort of setup. And that's where the dashboarding again becomes an internal tool, because the only way to really measure impact across these campaigns is really via the A/B, testing or the test and control groups. So if you are just banking on Google Analytics-based attribution, you will get more and more surprised by some of these test and control results, because the attribution that happens in Google can be fairly misleading, especially when it comes to CRM kind of topics. As an example, if you've sent out an SMS campaign to 100,000 people, and this also contains a link, and this also contains a unique voucher code, which is only on this campaign, you'll probably come back and notice that the URL got something like 20 orders, but that voucher got utilized something like 300 times. So your response measurement can get completely beaten if you're just purely banking on Google Analytics. And that's where my belief is that the way to actually judge response rates, given that you have customer data, is to see that if you send a communication to 100,000 people, out of this audience, just exclude 10% of the people and look at how the remaining 90% performed or responded to that message vis-a-vis the remaining 10%. And that's where you will see the clear uplift coming in from there. So, of course, this needs a certain level of commitment and alignment at the management level to deploy the kind of resources it takes to do effective CRM. But I'm pretty certain with the way the markets are moving now, it's just going to become a topic of attention for everyone. So that's where the organization structure, the way the teams are being built for acquisition across different channels, it can't just be left to a couple of people doing email or push marketing to just take care of all CRM. It's just not going to work effectively. So, like I was saying, that the moment you start bringing together different kinds of data, with each new set of data coming in, you'll be able to imagine a fairly creative and attractive new campaign. And that's where I am of the view that the magic is not so much in one huge campaign that'll give you the big win, but there'll be hundreds of small campaigns that you could do. And the best part is you set up this campaign, you automate it, and you leave it there to run for a month. You don't really, change it every day. Of course, you monitor performance, you can make necessary corrections, but each of these things will contribute pretty much forever to your email response or your CRM impact. It's not just something that you sent today and it's over tomorrow, like you would do with a regular email. So I just give you this example in terms of the SMS orders bit. If you're not doing test control, you will be in for a lot of surprises when you actually do it. And it's not funny in the kind of business impact that can actually have some of these activities. So, one of the things I hear from people sometimes is we're a fairly small company, we don't really need automation yet. And that's the funny thing again, because I had an example from one of the countries that we would operate in. And till the time we were still on manual CRM, one day the person was absent and she did not send the push out. And the next morning I knew there was a huge dip in the performance because it's a fairly manual system. And one day if it's missed, it's a loss. And that's where I'm of the view that the earlier you start setting up the automation processes, the better it is for you in the longer run, because you will probably end up cleaning up the data fairly well. Some of the things like cookies, the earlier you start collecting them, the more data you have to actually utilize. If you only start collecting cookies, say a year down the line, then they can only address the customers after this 1 year time frame. They'll not address the people who've already come in and left. So that's where to start early is useful. I mean, you may not have all the dedicated resources in which it makes sense, in which case it makes sense to actually get some bit of external assistance and just set up these 5 or 10 automated campaigns and then let this run on autopilot for a bit as you optimize and grow your team. So that's pretty much all we have for today. So now we're happy to take questions. It was a brief session. I understand I couldn't go into a lot of detail with stuff, but happy to have follow-up conversations. You can be in touch with me, and of course, the WebEngage team is here to help you as well.
Well, though it was a brief session, but I guess they have many takeaways to take from this one. We do have a few questions from the people who attended the webinar, and I'll put them out for you now. So, Ritu has asked us, how do you prioritize any particular channel, and how do you map that channel with a segment?
So I think a channel that is most important in terms of impact to me is the website or the application itself, because anybody who's coming to you for a transaction or interaction is on your application. The conversion rate is typically between 3 to 4 to 5%, and if you're able to lift that conversion rate by a meaningful number because of your targeted communication, utilizing your CRM, understanding of that customer, that should make a big impact. How do you do this? In terms of there's a concept of data layers that's there in Google, which makes a bunch of user variables available on the website to any page. Now, WebEngage also can work with these things as I think tokens or the custom variables as they call it. So what would happen is you'll have to do a few calculations on the backend system. So you'll have to work with your IT team to say that I want to use recency, frequency, and monetary value as a criteria. You could always look at more complex stuff like profitability and lifetime value. But for the sake of this example, let's say you're talking about recency as a criteria. What would happen is on the data layer, you will have the value of recency available for each customer that's on the website. And you will then set up a WebEngage campaign saying that any customer with recency more than 15 days should see this particular offer.
Okay, that sums up that question. We have Mayank asking us, how crucial is A/B testing in marketing, and does it yield results for the team?
So if you look at A/B testing in a very fundamental way, on the way it's been done so far is on emails or even banners. Now, after a point of maturity, you might be able to see a subject line and say that this is going to work and this is not going to work. But apart from that, it tends to be often fairly surprising. And as such, there's not much harm in doing A/B testing on a continuous basis, because whenever you get a lift compared to one subject line in the other, you just got a bunch of additional openers. And this would apply across all sorts of situations. So not just from the view that it's doing for one channel, but if you look at the overall customer journey as well, the one set of interactions going against different set of interactions, you'll know much better the incremental impact of these things instead of doing just one thing at a time. So if you're not doing A/B but doing only A, it would become fairly difficult for you to understand which part of it actually made the impact.
Okay. Um, Ankur, even I had a question during the slides. When we were talking about the status of users, there were active users, the recently acquired one, and the one who become inactive.
Right.
So how do you consider an acquired user to be cold? Is there a threshold to it, or is there a time limit to it?
See, there could be a certain degree of predictive modeling you can apply there. The classic problem that you see is a bunch of people who have to repeat would end up placing their second order. So if I have placed my first order today, a big chances I'll end up placing my second order within the next 7 days. The more you go away from the day zero is when you place the first order. The more you go away, I mean, the big impact I've seen in the fall is after 21 days or 30 days. Of course, it's dependent on different industries. And I can only speak about fashion or food because that's where I know that the impact after 30 days is fairly significant. So the probability of that guy coming back becomes super, super low.
Okay. We have Pankaj asking us, how does your tool compare with tools like CleverTap or MoEngage? Well, that specifies for an answer for WebEngage. Pankaj, when we talk about More Engage only talks about your mobile engagement. WebEngage as a tool is a marketing automation tool which talks about your on-site messages, your in-app messages, your email marketing, your SMS and push messages all in total. So I'll send you a detailed analysis of WebEngage compared to CleverTap or MoEngage just after this session. We'll keep this session more about customer retention. We have Jyoti asking us, what is the learning curve for an in-house team to get trained on using WebEngage platforms? Jyoti, we'll talk about WebEngage and the learning curve for the in-house team to get trained with a
I can give you a
WebEngage.
fairly quick answer. It took us 1 day. So
Yeah. So
that's not a
Ankur has
problem.
used WebEngage fairly. So he says it takes 1 day, and it's a fairly non-technical platform. The only technicality required to it is the integration part of it, and after that, any marketing manager can pick it up in a day, as Ankur says. We have another question from Alex. Uh, she asked us, in your experience, is there any pattern followed by our people acquired from SEO, SEM, and social marketing? So I guess she wants to ask whether if a person who's coming from Google AdWords, their buying experience is different from somebody who's coming from your Facebook ads or your Twitter ads.
Sure. So, I won't say about SEO or social being a big impact, but we definitely have seen the utilization of affiliates as a channel as being an audience which is fairly different from the rest of the audience. This could again be subjective and dependent on the industry. If I were to look at just Facebook, SEO, SEM as a channel, we haven't really found them to be significantly impactful in the customer lifetime value or customer behavior. But affiliates as a channel definitely had a very, very different behavior.
Okay. We'll take just one last question. This question is from Ravi. Is there any concept of lead scoring in B2C like it is there in B2B? Can engagement be normalized from different channels?
When you say lead scoring, you're talking about activation as a mechanism. So, which would mean that if you're doing signups of new leads, which are not people who place an order across different channels, it's not going to be easy to score these guys because you have fairly little information about them. What you could possibly do is measure the activation rates of these leads over the next 15 days after they've been acquired and see if any of these groups is giving you a better activation rate compared to the other.
Okay. With this, we'll wrap up this webinar. It was great to have you on board with us, Ankur. This was one insightful session for all our users. We'll like to have you once more with more insights for our users. Thank you everyone for joining us for the webinar. Keep hooked up to monk.webengage so that you can get regular updates about our webinars and the blogs that are published. See you soon. Have a nice day ahead.
Bye, everyone.